वालेकुम, नमस्ते, सत श्री अकाल। कैसे हैं आप लोग? उम्मीद करती हूँ ठीक होंगे, खुश होंगे। मैं हूँ हज़ीक अली और मेरे साथ हैं
तारिक नियाज़ी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम, नमस्ते, सत श्री अकाल। उम्मीद करता हूँ ठीक होंगे, खुश होंगे। दोस्तों जहाँ रहें खुश रहें, माँ बाप का ख्याल करें क्योंकि माँ बाप है तो सभी कुछ है। आज की हमारी वीडियो है
प्रवीण मोहन जी से रिलेटेड। से स्टार्ट करते हैं अपनी वीडियो को। लेट्स स्टार्ट। ओके गाइस, तो वीडियो का टाइटल है प्रवीण मोहन, इंडियन हिस्ट्री रिटोल्ड एंड रिथॉट, द रणवीर शो 259।
The newest building cannot also be the oldest or the tallest or the most, like the biggest building, right? Because we evolve. People had the Eiffel Tower 100 years ago. They go there, they study the Eiffel Tower, then they make it better. Then they build a taller, better structure. They build CN Tower, right? But then people from Dubai go to CN Tower, they study that structure, and then they build Burj Khalifa. 20 years from now, we know it is not going to be Burj Khalifa, right? Because it's evolution of technique, right? We keep on improving. Now, archaeologists confirm that, yes, these pillars are made using lathe technology, okay? We can see the turn marks. When you make a pot, you will see lines in that pot, okay? Because they're constantly rotating. And experts, they're embarrassed to admit this, right? Because they don't want to admit this, but they admit it. Yes, we don't know how, but they use lathe machines to make these pillars.
So the lathe machine must have been maybe like 300, 400 meters long, bro, which is a huge lathe machine.
Yes.
Praveen Mohan, one of the most requested guests that we've ever brought on the show. People have been requesting for an episode with him since 2019, since the podcast began. The reason we couldn't do it earlier was that Praveen Mohan spends most of his time exploring ancient sites in India as well as the world, trying to uncover the truths about the past that may have been forgotten. In a world that quickly shuns and quickly downplays possible alternative history theories, Praveen Mohan is going about these archaeological missions by himself on his own budget. He's documenting only 10% of it and releasing it on his YouTube channel. And that 10% is enough to fascinate an entire nation. That's the power of this man's experiences. There's a couple of episodes we did on this particular day, and they were both about the remaining 90%. The kind of stuff that he can't talk about easily on his YouTube channel. If you're a Praveen Mohan subscriber, you're in for a lot of content that's possibly not made it onto his fantastic vlogs. And if you're not a Praveen Mohan subscriber, I promise you that by the end of both these episodes, you will become one. For more episodes like this, make sure you follow The Ranveer Show on Spotify. We're Spotify exclusive. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. Before I let you slip into these fantastic episodes, I want to highlight that Level Supermind, our meditation app, is now live. Everything from beginners to intermediate to advanced, guided meditations, sleep stories, sleep meditations, all of it is available on the app. Make sure you download it. The link is given down below. And now I'll let you slip into a perspective building conversation. This is part one of our special with Praveen Mohan. Praveen Mohan, sir, the most requested TRS episode in recent times for sure, and possibly of all times. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
I love that we're matching right now with our colors.
Yeah.
I love that we're both engineers. I love that we're YouTubers. And I love that we have this fascination for ancient India. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Is-
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so pumped about just opening up this topic about ancient India with you. I think history is not taught to us in schools, in the Indian education system, the way it should be taught. And I don't blame the education system, honestly. I feel the people who wrote our history books were confined to the history that was discovered possibly in the 80s or early 90s. And in the last 30 years, history has changed on a global scale. People have realized so much because so much more of the Earth's crust has been dug into. So we're re-realizing history. but probably the education system is not keeping up. You're also a 90s kid. So
Yeah.
would you agree when I say these things?
Yeah. Well, some parts of this I agree.
Okay.
But history was written like 100, 200 years ago. The books that we read today, all the kids read today, they were written maybe 100 years ago, right? And there is a calculation behind this. There is a calculated bias that's put into the history book, right? That misinformation spreads. But as we become more and more globalized, because 50 years ago, if somebody's sitting in India and saying something, a person in Germany is not going to be able to listen to it, right? But today, as we globalize more, the information we find, any historian finds, or what you find if you go to Elephanta Caves and then you find this information, you're immediately able to throw it on YouTube or other social media. And that gets spread to millions of people. So we are able to see it as a fact that history books are um, full of misinformation.
Okay. Um, I think that you've always been destined to do what you're doing right now. So there must have been some internal fascination with what you're doing right now. And a lot of people in the mainstream know you as someone who's showcasing the secrets as well as the knowledge of temples in India. Now, keeping this in mind, please correct me if I'm wrong, sir. But because we've been invaded so much over the years, I think this is the first generation of Indians, basically, or the first three generations, which are not under some sort of invasion after like 1000 years. Like 1000 years of people before us have been invaded, which means that a lot of the temples, especially in North India and probably even Central India, have been destroyed. But South India has a lot of temples and a lot of ancient secrets that are still intact.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that you do have a bit more focus on the temples of the South and that the secrets are still kind of locked in.
Yes, I mean, I do get blamed. I am a South Indian, obviously, and I do get blamed a lot for this, right? Why do you only cover South India? And whenever we put temples from North India, it blows up. A lot of people watch it. But I do get blamed. Why are you always focusing on South India?
Because that's what's left.
Exactly. Because most of the temples in the north and in the central part of India are already demolished. And this is the funny part because a lot of people from north will say, Praveen Mohan, why are you not posting anything from North India? The answer is, you guys don't have anything left. And a lot of people in South India, when people from the north come to South India, right? They're always mocking them, saying that, oh, you guys don't have any actual temples, right? You guys don't have any really ancient Hindu temples. All the temples are actually in South India, right? The North India is very socially, politically active, right? The northern part of India is socially, politically active about Hinduism. They're always like Hindutva, it's very open in politics. And the South is not so much, as you can see. And the South always mocks the North Indians, saying that, oh, but all the temples are here. But what they don't understand, what the South Indians don't understand, is only because all the North Indians were fighting the invaders so hard that they still have the temples left in South India, right? If the North Indians were not fighting that much, they were not protecting against the invaders, there would be no temples in South India. So they don't understand that.
Just pause for a second.
Hmm.
All my love to Tamil Nadu. Punjabi pride. Okay, sorry. Go on.
Yeah. So this is the idea. So the so-called divide between the North and South basically exists because we don't understand each other.
And in all honesty, India is a bunch of different countries put together, united by culture.
Yes.
Keeping that in mind, you've visited a lot of temples, man. You've visited more temples than 4 of my grandparents put together. So, which one has stayed with you the longest? I'm not asking you your favorite. I'm asking the one that stayed with you the longest, where you couldn't get it out of your head.
Each temple is different. I used to have many favorite places. Like when I went to Kailasa Temple, uh, I thought nobody can build a better temple than the Kailasa Temple. It's made of just one stone.
Where
It's
is it?
it's in Ellora Caves. It's in Aurangabad. It's very close to Mumbai. And the way they built it, normally, how do you build temples, right? So you start from the ground level, you keep on putting one stone block up on top, and you build a temple. This is how you're supposed to build anything. But the Kailasa temple is completely different. So they start from the mountaintop, they remove the rocks, they scooped out the extra rocks, and what is left out is a temple. That is the Kailasa temple. It's made of one stone. There's no metal, there's no wooden blocks, there's no extra stone added to it. And this temple has so many features. It has like a bridge connecting one part to another. And it has so many chambers and pillars, all made of just one stone. And I mean, honestly, it should be named as a world wonder, if you will, right? If it was built anywhere outside India, it would have probably been, considered as a wonder of the world. But because we don't promote these kind of monuments, it's just now it's getting popular, but it's not well known yet.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have said on the podcast, that India has a dormant tourism industry. Like it's going to blow up when Indians decide that it's time for it to blow up. But I think that's what you're doing through your content. I do have so many other questions about kind of more esoteric things about the temples. I know you have like this whole intuitive side. We were talking about palm reading on the outside. And at the cost of asking you a slightly personal question, have you had like a spiritual childhood or teenage which allows you to be this kind of fascinated, naturally fascinated by these temples? Like, do you understand them on a deeper level?
I don't know how I got this perspective, but I grew up in temples. So
Okay.
this gave me a huge advantage because I grew up inside temples. So all the Hindu temples in Tamil Nadu, they close around 11 o'clock in the morning, and then they only open up at like 5 o'clock. So between 11 to 5, nobody's allowed inside the temple. And the temples are huge, okay? The temples are not just one shrine or something like this. It'll take you maybe an like half hour to walk around. They're big temples. So I had the opportunity to be inside the temple from 11 to 5 when nobody was there. So I used to spend a lot of time inside the temple, talking. Like I was very young. I was maybe 6, 7 years old at that time. And this happened between 6 to 10 years old. So I would go to the gods and I would kind of talk to them, right? Because when you're that young, you're basically like looking at a character in TV,
Yeah.
and you're talking to them. So it's very interesting to me saying that why is this god carved this way, right? And there are many different things. Like so, there's one god called Deaf God. This is called Chandikeswara. I don't know if you've heard of this. It used to be there in the North Indian temples too, and unfortunately, all these things are gone now. But if you go to Tamil Nadu, you'll find a god called Chandikesa in one of the shrines, and this will be the last deity you see before you get out of the temple, and everybody will do this to this god because he cannot hear you. So that's why he's called the deaf god. So everybody will kind of clap at him or do this sometimes. So as a child, I used to wonder, why are there so many gods and why are they all designed this way? Some of them definitely have a spiritual aspect to them. I mean, it should not be a coincidence.
What do you mean?
There are the gods are classified into different ways. The gods are classified into different levels, right? Some people argue that, oh, the sun god, the Surya, right? Some people argue as though you guys worship sun as a god. They almost think that ancient Hindus did not understand that sun is a huge ball of fire. In fact, we knew all of that, right? So who are the two wives of the sun? Right? Do you know? Okay.
Assuming it's the moon.
No.
Okay.
The moon is also a man. So actually
Oh, really?
yeah, Chandra
Okay.
is also a man. So it'd be like Chaya and Sandhya, right? So, but again, these are just personifications. One of them denotes, the sunset, and the other one denotes the shadow. So we understood perfectly what each thing means. And sometimes they put all these factors as gods. So they took all these aspects of nature and they put them as gods. So they did a very advanced, they created a very advanced system that's hard to explain. For example, the Chandikesa, right, where everybody went and they tapped their hands like this. It turns out that he's not a deaf god, right? If you go to even the priest in a temple, he'll say, "Oh, he's a deaf god. You always have to do this before you leave the temple." But I found in one of the inscriptions that Chandikesa was the treasurer of the temple. He's the deity who's in charge of all the properties of the temple. So when they start building the temple, and you can bring a lot of stuff, right? You can bring a lot of property and you can have all these tools and stuff. He's basically the security guard that's going to check you if you left everything in the temple and you're not taking away the temple's property. And that's why the ritual that, look, I'm not taking anything, right, from the temple started. So after 500 years, this just kind of modified and evolved into saying that, oh no, he's just a deaf god. Who's this god? He's just a deaf god.
Probably the true wisdom gets lost a little bit like Chinese whispers
Yes.
over time.
Yes.
So I can't imagine what the truth was 20,000, 30,000, 100,000 years ago.
Mm.
Because I've come to believe, because of this podcast, that our civilization is a lot longer than we're told even in history books. And I used to always think about this when I used to read Amar Chitra Katha, things about Dwapar Yog, Satyug. It couldn't have been just a few thousand years ago. It had to have been a long time back. I listened a lot to Graham Hancock. I don't know if you're familiar with,
Yes.
who talks about how we think we're the most advanced civilization because we have technology and cameras and science. Who's to say that there weren't more advanced civilizations earlier that got wiped out because of
A meteor.
apocalyptic events, younger dryas and all that? Do you have any opinion on this?
So if you look at, standard accounts from history or archaeology, 2,000 years ago, Indians were basically just tribes with sticks and stones, fighting with sticks and stones. Okay, so that is the standard account that we read in history.
You mean the international standard account written by imperialists?
That is true, right? But what do you read, right? I'm not saying that this is what we read in the US about India, or this is not we read in Britain about India. What do you read about India in your own history? How did we exist 2,000 years?
Indus Valley civilization. All
Yeah.
that. That's what's written.
But what about before that? Let's say 2,500 years ago. If you actually start to read more and more history books, it basically goes into kind of the Stone Age, right? People actually believe that all the civilization only started after the Mughals and then the Europeans. This is the gist of the history.
You mean Indians or international?
Of course, in India as well. In India as well, if you actually open the history book, most of us know like who's the first Mughal king of India. You probably know the answer. But if I ask you who's the first Chola king, you probably would not know the answer. You probably know one Chola king, they may be Rajaraja Chola or Rajendra Chola. Those are the Cholas that everybody, okay? Because we are not taught that, right? And this is very tricky, right? Because very, very hard to fathom because we have a traditional view of history. You have a traditional view of history that you don't even know about, right? So let me ask you, we evolved. I hope you would think that we evolved, right? We would have built a small temple first, and then a larger temple later, and then a even bigger temple later, right? That's how we evolved, right? That's what you think, and this is what we see in history books and other mainstream books, right? What is the tallest building today in the world?
Burj Khalifa,
Okay, good. What was the tallest building 20 years ago?
World Trade Centers and Empire State Building,
Yeah, something like that, right? CN Tower in Canada,
Petronas
right?
Tower.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. What about 100 years ago? What is the tallest tower 100 years ago? What is that?
Maybe like the Eiffel Tower?
Exactly, correct. Oh, that's really good.
Yeah,
No,
podcast logic.
yeah, it's really, actually, it's pretty accurate. I'm shocked that you know that much of history. That's really good. So, what are we actually saying is that the newest building cannot also be the oldest or the tallest or the most, like the biggest building, right? Because we evolve. People had the Eiffel Tower 100 years ago. They go there, they study the Eiffel Tower, then they make it better. Then they build a taller, better structure. They build CN Tower, right? But then people from Dubai go to CN Tower, they study that structure, and then they build Burj Khalifa. 20 years from now, we know it is not going to be Burj Khalifa, right? Because it's evolution of technique, right? We keep on improving. Now, what is the largest cave temple structure in India?
No idea.
It is Ajanta Caves. Okay. Now, what is the oldest cave temple structure in India?
Is it somewhere in Madhya Pradesh?
That is also Ajanta Cave. Now, what is the largest ancient dam in India? This is called Kallanai. It's a huge structure. It's still there. Now, what is the oldest dam in India? That is also Kallanai. That's 2,000 years old. So the concept of evolution actually does not apply because, look, I mean, in all fairness, people in the last 2,000 years, they would have gone to Ajanta Cave, say, wow, this is really big. Now let me make it bigger. That's what humans should have done. But why didn't they do it? Right? They look at a dam that is 2,000 years old, right? And say, wow, this dam is really big, right? They changed the flow of a river 2,000 years ago. Okay. But why didn't they say, now let me make a bigger dam? Now, same thing with Kailasa temple. They take a huge hill and they convert it into one temple. This is 1,300 years ago. But what were humans doing in the last 1,300 years ago? Nobody said, I can make a better temple, right? So the concept of evolution actually does not apply to the timeline. This is and this is the biggest problem. I think when the British came and they studied all these structures, they were shocked because these structures are completely kind of out of the world, right? They don't follow a pattern. They're not able to find an evolution pattern, right? It's almost like suddenly a giant woke up and they built insane structures and they're gone. Like we don't know how they did it. Like we cannot learn from them. You know, and this is a shocker that we find in history books.
Is it because of the invasions that the construction stopped?
We don't know why. These things are much before the invasion. For example, Ajanta Caves is more than 2,000 years ago,
Okay.
right? The invasion only started maybe 1,000 years ago.
Maybe
But
arrogance kicked in.
we don't know how. So this is the part where it gets really tricky. So when I say, oh, you know, was this temple built with like alien technology? People are always confused by that. People are always thinking like, what does he mean, alien technology? You know, like, or aliens dropping out of UFO and building these structures? What I'm saying is, if it's human, there should be a pattern of improvement that we are able to see, right? There should be a pattern of, like, there should be a slope where, say, you build a small temple here, then you build a big temple there. But we don't see that. We don't see that at all. Think about, let's say, humans built Ajanta caves, right? Humans built, and we will get into this, right? A lot of humans started to take like hammers and chisels and say, I'm going to make Ajanta caves. There should be a model that existed before that.
Hmm.
There is no model.
Like there's no precursor, which is just kind of smaller.
There is no precursor that is even close to Ajanta caves,
Hmm.
and there's no
Successor.
structure after that. Yeah, there's no successor after that, right? That is better than Ajanta cave.
Hmm.
But it should not exist. Okay? And this is the problem when people keep saying that, what do you mean? Like they did not do it with chisels and hammers. So how do you think, right? How do you think the temples were made?
There's two answers I have. One's from the logical side of my brain, one's from the emotional side. The emotional side says aliens came and used lasers. The logical side says that maybe it was built over like a very long time span where it was like maybe a king of that region who said, okay, my next 5 or 10 generations will keep building this.
Yes. Well, that is a good way to answer that question, right? So still, what kind of techniques would they use to build a temple, right? So let's say they build the entire Kailasa temple with chisels and hammers, right? These are all the basic tools, right? There's a chisel that has a pointed end. There's a hammer that people hammer into this. And then maybe pickaxe, the small tools that they have. But if you go to temples in Karnataka, okay, there are temples like Hoysaleswara temple, there are temples like Chennakeshava temple, and these temples have pillars that are completely made using lathe machines. Archaeologists accept this.
You'll have to explain that word. I get what you're saying because of engineering college, but explain it for the listeners. What is that?
Okay. So we see pillars that are made with lathe machines. So when we look at, let's say, this mic, the holder of this mic, you cannot make the holder, the circle, with a chisel and a hammer. That's impossible. You cannot make a perfect circle with a chisel and hammer. That's impossible to do. You need a rotating machine to make such a pillar.
In engineering college, we have a subject called workshop. I can see you smiling. Workshop is where they teach you kind of how to begin using a lathe machine, which is one of the most basic engineering machines in the world, probably.
Yeah.
Right now, it's the most rudimentary.
The most basic lathe machine, if you really want to know, that we have used for thousands of years is a wheel to create pots, right? So we have a wheel, and then you put some clay on top of this, and if you keep rotating the wheel, the pot will start to really come into position depending on how you use your hand. Now, this is a lathe machine.
Like something that gives you an accurate geometric shape.
Yes, a rotating mechanism that is capable of giving you a perfect cylinder or a circular shape. That's a lathe machine. Now, archaeologists confirm that, yes, these pillars are made using lathe technology. Okay, we can see the turn marks. When you make a pot, you will see lines in that pot, okay, because they're constantly rotating. Yeah. So you can see these marks in those pillars. And experts, they're embarrassed to admit this, right? Because they don't want to admit this, but they admit it. Yes, we don't know how, but they use lathe machines to make these pillars. We're not talking about one pillar, okay? We're talking about hundreds, thousands of pillars. And these pillars will weigh like 20 tons.
So the lathe machine must have been maybe like 300, 400 meters long, probably, which is a huge lathe machine.
Yes. And of course, if you really want to counter it, saying that, oh, we can make a lathe machine with like 100 horses or something like that. Okay, you can do that. But why?
And this is a mechanical engineer speaking. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, but why? Right? Why bother? And we're not talking about just one or two pillars, okay? All the pillars in that area are all made using lathe technology. Okay. And then, so we know that they were not only using chisels and hammers, they were using other machines. And then you find like a stone skull, right? So there is a huge Dwarapalaka, is a doorkeeper. Okay. And it's dark. It's like pitch black. You have to take a flashlight and then you have to go and you have to examine it. It's really cool when you do this. And I got millions of views when I first demonstrated that, because it's dark. Nobody goes to these places, right? So this Dwarapalaka has a crown on his head.
What is the
Right.
meaning of the word Dwarpalika?
Dwarapalaka means a doorkeeper.
Okay.
So if you go to a temple, there will be a main deity, and Dwara means door, and Palaka is just the keeper, right? So you'll have two doorkeepers on either side. Okay. The doorkeepers are usually fancy, but nobody pays attention to them. And in this temple, it's very dark. When I went in there, the doorkeeper is really fancy, and he has a crown. Okay. And his crown is studded with skulls. Each skull is only about this wide and this tall. Okay. About 1 inch diameter.
Mm.
Okay. And the skull has like an open mouth and two eye sockets and 2 ears. So what I did was I took a small needle or like a twig, right? A thread, if you will, and I put it in his ear and it came out. I could put it, I could make it come out of his eye, I could make it come out of his ear, I could make it come out of his mouth. So I started to play with this, right? So I would put it in his mouth and then it would come out the ear. Now, what does this mean? This means that stone skull that's only about 1 inch wide is completely hollow. And this is made of stone. So, how do you make that with chisels and hammers? How is it possible? Right? So, archaeologists and historians are wrong in saying that these temples were built with primitive tools. Now, the general idea that you will have is that they did it for a long period of time, right? They were just using brute force, but they were using some kind of advanced technology to achieve that.
Advanced machinery.
Of course, they were using advanced machines. So we know that they were using lathe machines. That's a fact. We don't know what kind of lathe machine it was. We don't know what
A-
kind it is.
And more importantly, we don't know why it didn't get used again later.
Yes. Yeah, of
Which
course.
is what
There's no
you-
continuity to that. There's some technology that pops up, and then after like maybe 100 years, that technology is gone. You know this, right? Ramappa Temple in Telangana, it just got UNESCO World Heritage status. It's announced as a World Heritage Site, which is a big honor for that temple. When I went and I was researching that temple, this is in a small village in Telangana. Most people didn't know that temple at that time. So when I went and I was researching the temple is made of bricks. Okay. And the temple looks great. When you enter the temple, the tower is huge. The temple looks perfect. Okay. So when we took a brick from the temple, it was unusually light. It was just really, it was not as heavy as a brick should be. So when we put it in water, we realized it floats. Okay, this is not a natural rock. Some rocks naturally float like pumice. Okay, there are rocks that
yeah.
are really porous, but this is not a natural rock. Okay, this is a brick made, but when you put it in water, it floats.
Mm.
Today, we use the same technology. We use a technology called AAC, or autoclaved aerated concrete, I think. It's unusually light because they take some concrete and they inject foam and other lightweight material into the brick. And again, these blocks will also float in water.
Mm.
Okay. Now, but why did they do this? Why did they have to create these lightweight blocks in like 800, 900 years ago? Why did Indians do that, right? If you go into the temple, you are in for a surprise, because there are lots of pillars and beams. They're like they have fallen down because there was a massive earthquake that happened in that area. But you will not even realize that this place had an earthquake when you see it from the outside. You can still see some damage inside, but from the outside, there's no damage. And believe it or not, today, Japanese use the same technology to build their buildings. They always get earthquakes and they use those lightweight stone blocks.
It's kind of like a early form of earthquake proof technology.
Exactly, exactly. And they were doing earthquake proofing 800, 900 years ago. And we know that all the structures, okay, all the buildings and everything except that temple in that area were completely gone. They were all completely wiped out because of the earthquake. Only the temple remained because the ancient builders knew, okay, this is an earthquake prone area where they probably predicted, right, that there's going to be an earthquake here. And we want to make a temple that will withstand that. So there's no reason to claim that ancient builders were just taking chisels and hammers, going like, oh, okay, I'll just build a temple. That's not how they did it.
Is this your motivation to go to all these temples? Like you want to see deeper technologies? Like the engineer in you is also a part of this.
It is a part of this. What really happens is that what really started to happen when I was in the US and I used to come here and I visited Ellora Caves and I visited Konark Sun Temple and stuff like that, I immediately recognized a pattern where this does not match our history book. This makes no sense. It should not exist, right? The Kailasa temple should not exist.
Or rather, why aren't such advanced technologies spoken about in our history books?
Yes, that's it.
जी जनाब,
Amazing.
बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त और काफ़ी वीडियोस हमने इनकी देखी हैं। अच्छा, सबसे पहले तो स्टार्ट करते हैं जहाँ से उन्होंने स्टार्ट किया कि वाकई जितनी भी डिटेल है हिस्ट्री है वो मिसिंग है। बहुत सारी चीज़ें हम लोगों को नहीं पता, हमारी यंग जनरेशन को नहीं पता, बल्कि हैं ही नहीं वो। जब है ही नहीं तो कैसे पता चलेगा? जब बाप दादा परदादा को नहीं पता तो आने वाली जनरेशन को कैसे पता चलेगा? बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं ही नहीं, पता ही नहीं है। अच्छा, दूसरी चीज़ ये कि अभी कुछ दिन पहले ही एक वीडियो देखी थी ध्रुव राठी की, उन्होंने यही डिटेल दी थी कि वाकई अच्छा वो पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू कुछ और था, इस टेम्पल्स के हवाले से नहीं था, कल्चर के हवाले से था, लैंग्वेजेस के हवाले से था। और तब्दीलियाँ जो आ जाती हैं, बस मिसाल के तौर पे एक इलाका है, एक गांव है, एक खित्ता है, एक जज़ीरा है, उस जज़ीरे में जितने बाहर के लोग नहीं आते तो वो सदियों परंपराएं रहती हैं वहाँ के कल्चर में, वहाँ के खाने पीने में। जितना बाहर से लोग आते हैं किसी भी कंट्री में, किसी भी जज़ीरे में या किसी भी मुल्क में, तो उनका जो अपना असल जो कल्चर है उसके अंदर मिक्सअप हो जाती हैं चीज़ें। अच्छा, फिर डिस्ट्रॉय किया, हिस्ट्री डिस्ट्रॉय की, वो सारी चीज़ें जो हैं वो ज़्यादातर नॉर्थ इंडिया में हुई हैं। तो इस वजह से भी आज हमें जो टेम्पल्स मिलते हैं, हिस्टोरिकल टेम्पल, 2-2, 3-3 हज़ार साल पुराने टेम्पल्स, वो तकरीबन साउथ ही की तरफ मिलते हैं। और साउथ का कल्चर वाकई जिस तरीके से इनका कल्चर सदियों पुराना है, इनके जो रस्म व रवाज हैं, इनके जो फूड्स हैं, इनका जो रहना सहना है, इसी तरह से टेम्पल्स भी सदियों पुराने आज तक इसीलिए ज़्यादातर बच पाए हैं कि यहाँ पर बाकायदा ये लोगों से लड़े थे। हमने काफ़ी वीडियोस देखी, छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज बाकायदा मतलब आखिरी दम तक, एंड तक उन्होंने बाकायदा अपने शासन को बचाने की कोशिश की, एंड तक वो लड़ते रहे। मुग़ल था, बहुत सारे लोग थे जो इस तरफ आते थे, लेकिन ये अपने दम पर, अपने बलबूते पर काफ़ी अरसे तक मुकाबला करते रहे। अच्छा, सबसे अच्छा जो वाकई मुझे भी बहुत इम्प्रेसिंग करते, मतलब हैरान कर देने वाला वो टेम्पल था कैलासा टेम्पल। वो मतलब एक इंसान तसव्वुर करे, अक्सर मैं सोचता हूँ कि यार सारी चीज़ें मिल चुकी हैं, सारे बड़े बड़े एक सबूत के तौर पे इतनी बड़ी बड़ी चीज़ें मौजूद हैं, लेकिन जिस टेक्नोलॉजी से ये बने थे उस टेक्नोलॉजी की कुछ चीज़ें क्यों नहीं मिली आज तक? मतलब एक औज़ार होते हैं या फिर जिस तरीके से वो चीज़ बनती थी, जिससे वो तोड़ते थे, मतलब वो मट्टी, लोहा, मट्टी है या रॉक है, वो आज तक कायम है। तो जो मतलब एक स्टोन वो थे, आयरन था, आयरन से बनी हुई जो चीज़ें थी या मशीनें थी, कुछ ना कुछ तो इन्होंने टेक्नोलॉजी बनाई होगी ना। वो टेक्नोलॉजी कहाँ है, उस पुर्जे कहाँ हैं, उस टेक्नोलॉजी के कोई औज़ार हैं, वो कहाँ हैं, ये मैं आज तक वाकई सोचता हूँ। और हम यही सोचते थे किसी तरीके से छोटे छोटे हैमर होंगे, और हम उसको छीनी कहते हैं। एक होती है छीनी लोहे की, एक होता है हथौड़ी। अब छीनी और हथौड़ी से ना छोटे छोटी सी नक्शो निगारी की जाती है। लकड़ी पे भी की जाती है, फूल पत्तियाँ बनाई जाती हैं, इस पर भी की जाती होगी, ज़ाहिर सी बात है। पत्थरों पर भी नाम लिखे जाते हैं, जैसे हमारे यहाँ पे कब्रिस्तान होते हैं, कब्रिस्तान के आसपास या मस्जिदों में बाकायदा संगे मरमर पे नक्शो निगारी होती है। लेकिन वो तो सिर्फ लिखा जा रहा होता है, लेकिन ये तो प्रॉपर खूबसूरत किस्म की बड़ी बड़ी चीज़ें बनाई जा रही हैं। तो वाकई ये किस तरीके से होता था, किस तरीके से वो लोग करते थे, इतनी अकल से बाहर की ये चीज़ है, इतनी समझ से बाहर की चीज़ है कि लोग यहाँ तक कहने लग गए कि क्या ये एलियंस टेक्नोलॉजी है, मतलब क्या एलियंस ने आके ये बनाए हैं। और वाकई किसी चीज़ का इंसान को जवाब नहीं मिलता तो इंसान अनहोनी की तरफ चला जाता है कि यार कैसे पॉसिबल है। मतलब या तो फिर जिन भूतों ने बनाए थे, या एलियंस ने बनाए थे, या एलियंस यहाँ आते थे, क्या वो इस तरह की टेक्नोलॉजी को करते थे। मतलब इनके पास भी इतना सोचो बेकार, फिर इनका सोच, इतनी गहरी सोच, इतनी डीपली ये सोचते हैं, लेकिन इनके पास भी इस चीज़ का जवाब नहीं है कि हाउ, कैसे बनाते थे ये लोग।
अच्छा, बहुत बड़ा योगदान है, मैं ये कहूँगी कि इनका बहुत बड़ा योगदान है एक तरीके से। बहुत मुझे ऐसा लगता है ये हर इंडियन का फ़र्ज़ था इन चीज़ों को खोजना, इन चीज़ों को जानना। असल में मुझे ऐसा लगता है हम लोगों में भी ये बात है कि हम इन चीज़ों पे इतना फोकस नहीं करते। हम कहते हैं ठीक है, एक टेंपल है, एक मस्जिद है, कोई भी रिलीजियस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट प्लेस है, कोई भी प्रेयर प्लेस है, तो हम उसको कहते हैं ठीक है जी वो है। हम इस डिटेल में नहीं जाते कि वो क्यों है, वो कैसे है, वो कब से है, उसके पीछे क्या हक़ाइक़ है, इसके पीछे हम नहीं जाते। और बस हम कहते हैं जी ठीक है ये है, ये 200 साल पुरानी है, 400 साल पुरानी है, 800 साल पुरानी है, ये 1000 साल पुरानी है, 5000 साल पुरानी, ठीक है ओके हो गया। जैसे कि मुंजो दाड़ो की भी अगर हम बात करें तो हमने उस पर इतनी रिसर्च नहीं करी, हमने उसके ऊपर हम इतनी डिटेल में नहीं गए, बहुत सारी चीज़ें अब तक हम जान भी नहीं पाए। लेकिन मैं इनको बहुत सराहना चाहूँगी इनके काम के लिए, इनकी मेहनत के लिए। ये जो इन्होंने योगदान दिया है, ये जो इन्होंने एक तरीके से रीथॉट किया है हिस्ट्री को, रियलाइज़ किया है हिस्ट्री को, ये अपने आप में बहुत अद्भुत बात है, बहुत कमाल की बात है। और शायद ये वाली एक थॉट या ये वाली सोच कैसे आई, कि कब आई, किस वजह से आई, मैं तो नहीं जानती इतना डिटेल में, लेकिन ये वाली सोच हर किसी की नहीं होती है कि अपना जानना कि ये टेंपल है तो इसके पीछे क्या हक़ाइक़ हैं, इसके पीछे क्या फैक्ट्स हैं, ये कब बना, ये कैसे कायम दायम है, इसके अंदर क्या मटेरियल यूज़ हुआ, इसके अंदर कौन सी टेक्नोलॉजी यूज़ हुई, इस डिटेल में हर इंसान नहीं जाता जिसमें ये गए हैं। तो ये मैं कहूँगी अपने आप में ही बहुत मुनफरिद हैं, बहुत अलग हैं। दूसरी बात ये कि जैसे ये वीडियोस में रखते हैं, आज मुझे तो बहुत पर्सनली चेंज लग रहे थे, काफ़ी यंग लग रहे थे, काफ़ी एनर्जेटिक लग रहे थे। एक और चीज़ मैंने जो इनसे सीखी या इनको देखकर मेरा एक नज़रिया हुआ वो ये कि साउथ के लोग बहुत ही टैलेंटेड हैं, बहुत ही टैलेंटेड है, जितनी तारीफ़ करूँ कम है। अब तक हम मूवीज़ के हवाले से जानते थे, देखते थे यार बड़े स्किलफुल होते हैं, बड़े टैलेंटेड होते हैं, क्या एक्टिंग करते हैं, क्या कमाल कर देते हैं, क्या शाहकार बनाते हैं। लेकिन अब मेरा थोड़ा सा नज़रिया बदला है कि सिर्फ मूवीज़ में नहीं, इनके डीएनए में, इनके जेनेटिक्स में ही टैलेंट है। ये जिस राह पर निकल जाएँ, ये जिस फील्ड को चुन लें, ये जिस चीज़ के तह में चले जाएँ या घुस जाएँ, उसके बाद ये वापस नहीं आते, ये उसकी खोज में निकल पड़ते हैं। ये सालों, हफ्तों, महीनों, ये अपना सारा टाइम, अपना सारा काम, अपना सारा फोकस उसके ऊपर ही वक्फ कर देते हैं। ये मुझे अपने आप में बहुत बड़ी बात इस वीडियो से पता चली, इनसे पता चली कि वाकई बहुत टैलेंटेड हैं, बहुत डीप में जाके सोचते हैं। अच्छा, इनका थॉट प्रोसेस मैंने देखा है नॉर्मल लोगों से हट कर। जैसे मैंने देखा कि सामने ब्लैक कलर है तो मैं कहूँगी ठीक है ब्लैक कलर है, हज़ारों बार मैंने देखा है ब्लैक कलर है तो ब्लैक कलर ठीक है होगा। या कोई टेंपल है उसके ऊपर मैंने देख लिया ब्लैक शेडो है या वाइट शेडो है या कोई चित्रकारी है, कोई नक्शो निकारी, मैं कहूँगी हाँ ठीक है होता होगा। वो उसकी तह में जाते हैं, जैसे कि उन्होंने बताया गेट कीपर का, बताया इन्होंने डोर कीपर का, कि मैंने उसके अंदर देखा उसकी आइज़ के बारे में बता रहे हैं, उसके अंदर पूरी रिसर्च करी, एक वीडियो हमने देखी थी, यहाँ पे होल था उसके, कौन सा होल था, फिर वो होल क्यों था, उसके पीछे क्या कायक जाने। तो इतना डिटेल में जाकर सोचते हैं कि मैं ये कहूँगी नॉर्मल इंसान के लिए बहुत एक्स्ट्राऑर्डिनरी है। मैं वसूख के साथ बोल सकती हूँ नॉर्मल इंसान इस हद तक जाकर नहीं सोच सकता, उसकी सोच उस हद तक नहीं जाती जिस हद तक इनकी सोच जाती है। साउथ के अंदर मुझे ऐसा लगता है बहुत बहादुर लोग हैं। देखिए इन्होंने भी वीडियो में कह दिया, खुलकर नहीं कहा लेकिन बात समझ में आ गई कि नॉर्थ के लोगों ने चीज़ों को प्रोटेक्ट नहीं किया। नॉर्थ पर जब हमले हुए, अटैक हुए, तो वो अपनी चीज़ों को बचा नहीं पाए, जिसकी वजह से बड़ी मिक्सिंग हो गई, बड़े डिफरेंट लोग आ गए, इन्वेडर्स आए, इन्वेजन हुआ। उसके बाद वो समझे उनकी रवायात, उनकी लैंग्वेजेस, उनकी जगहें, उनकी साइट्स, उनकी हिस्टोरिकल साइट्स वो वैसे कायमो दायम नहीं रह सकी, मंदिर भी वहाँ पे वैसे नहीं रह सके। लेकिन साउथ की तरफ आए तो उन्होंने अपनी जानें कुर्बान करके अपने खित्ते को, अपने साउथ को प्रोटेक्ट किया। और आज भी अगर 5000 साल पुराना मंदिर मिल रहा है तो साउथ में मिल रहा है, अगर 7000 साल पुराना मंदिर मिल रहा है तो साउथ में मिल रहा है, 800 साल पहले की टेक्नोलॉजी साउथ में दिख रही है। एक मंदिर के हवाले से उन्होंने कहा कि लीप टेक्नोलॉजी यूज़ हुई है उसमें, लैब टेक्नोलॉजी। अब वो ये कह रहे हैं कि मैं हैरान हूँ, परेशान हूँ, एक पिलर बना होता तो चलो ठीक है, मान लेते कि चलो हो गई होगी, किसी तरीके से हो गया होगा, हाथ से बना दिया होगा, मैनुअली कर दिया होगा। हज़ारों पिलर्स उसी टेक्नोलॉजी के थ्रू यूज़ हुए या बनाए गए हैं, कैसे पॉसिबल है? 800 साल पहले, 900 साल, तकरीबन 1000 साल पहले रख लेते, इतने पहले ये टेक्नोलॉजी कैसे थी? और वो रणवीर ने भी इस बात को आगे बढ़ाते हुए कहा कि आप ये कहना चाहते हैं कि बहुत एडवांस टेक्नोलॉजी, कितने का बहुत एडवांस टेक्नोलॉजी। दूसरी बात ये है कि या तो एलियन वाली जब बात हुई तो उन्होंने कहा इमोशनली, अगर मैं कहूँ, रणवीर से जब उन्होंने पूछा कि आपके कैंसर है तो उन्होंने कहा अगर मैं इमोशनली कहूँ तो ये कहूँगा कि एलियंस आए बना के चले गए, ठीक है ना, इंसानों के बस की बात नहीं थी। और लॉजिकली कहूँ तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कई जनरेशन्स लग गई हैं इस काम में, यानी एक एक मंदिर को बनाने में 5-5 जनरेशन्स लग गई हैं। मतलब किस तरीके से बनाया, कैसे बनाया, कितनी मेहनत करी, कितना टाइम दिया, क्या टेक्नोलॉजी यूज़ करी। एक पत्थर के हवाले से तो उन्होंने बताया भी कि वो इतना लाइटर है, उसको इंजेक्ट कर रहे हैं, उसके बाद उसको पानी में डालते हैं, उसके बाद फिर वो उसकी मियाद बढ़ गई, उसकी लाइफ इतनी बढ़ गई कि ज़लज़ले आ गए, तूफ़ान आ गए, सब कुछ तहस नहस हो गया, सारी चीज़ें बर्बाद हो गई, बड़ी से बड़ी बिल्डिंगें हिल गई, लेकिन वो मंदिर अपनी जगह कायम और दायम रहा। ऐसी टेक्नोलॉजी के सोच हैरान है, परेशानी की कैसे। फिर एक सवाल और उठाया इन्होंने, और मैं भी ये सोचने पर मजबूर हो गई हूँ कि जब हमारे आबाउजदाद इतने इंटेलिजेंट थे, ऐसी टेक्नोलॉजी को जानते थे, ऐसी चीज़ों के बारे में जानते थे, इतना कुछ जान चुके थे, इतना एडवांस्ड थे, उसके बाद अगर 5000 साल 4000 साल पहले ऐसा था, चले 800 साल पहले ऐसा था, रख लेते हैं रफली, 800 साल के बाद हम इतना पीछे कैसे हो गए? यानी कि उन्होंने बताया कि एवोल्यूशन हुआ है कि पहले बहुत छोटा मंदिर बना होगा, उसके बाद थोड़ा बड़ा, उसके बाद थोड़ा बड़ा, उससे अच्छा, उससे बड़ा बनाते चले गए, यानी स्टेप बाय स्टेप आगे बढ़े। पहले ही बहुत बड़ा नहीं बना, तो जब स्टेप बाय स्टेप आगे बढ़े तो तुम्हें अब तो मज़ीद आगे बढ़ना चाहिए था ना। जैसे अभी उन्होंने बताया अजंता केव्स के हवाले से उन्होंने मिसाल भी दी कि ओल्डेस्ट केव्स वही है, लार्जेस्ट केव वही है, उसके बाद कोई और क्यों नहीं बना? तो ये सवाल इन्होंने बिल्कुल वैलिड उठाया कि उसके बाद आगे का हमने क्यों नहीं सोचा, हमने मज़ीद एवोल्यूशन की तरफ हम क्यों नहीं गए, हम मज़ीद इसको आगे क्यों नहीं बढ़ा पाए, ऐसा क्या हुआ हमारे साथ, हमने क्या मिस आउट कर दिया।
सही है, बहुत ज़बरदस्त वीडियो थी। दोबारा किसी और के हिसाब से मुलाकात होगी, जब तक के लिए
अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।